Imagine for a second discovering that your life's work, like a novel you just poured your absolute soul into, agonizing over every single thematic arc and syntactic choice, has just been sucked up into a massive multi-billion parameter model.
Right. Owned by a trillion-dollar company.
Exactly. Owned by a trillion-dollar company. And naturally, I mean, your first instinct is to take them to court.
Of course it is.
But when you finally get to the discovery phase, you find out that the company's legal defense isn't some sheepish denial.
They aren't saying it was an accident.
No, they aren't saying it was an accident at all. Their defense is literally, yes, we pirated your work from a known shadow library, but we're using it in a highly transformative way to build a completely new kind of machine. So, under current legal frameworks, it's perfectly legal.
It's a defense that sounds almost like a satirical take on Silicon Valley's entitlement.
Yeah.
But it is exactly what is playing out right now in the United States federal court system. And what's really fascinating here is that this isn't just some fringe theory being tested by an obscure startup in a garage.
Right.
This is the documented, highly funded legal strategy of Meta.
Oh.
They are actively defending their llama models against allegations of mass copyright infringement, and they're arguing that the sheer scale and the purpose of their theft legally nullifies the theft itself.
It's wild. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack Meta's stunning and, frankly, completely audacious legal defense in the Cadre v. Meta copyright case.
It's a huge case.
It really is. We are going to explore exactly what they're claiming in court, why a trillion-dollar entity is just openly admitting to mass piracy, and the wild technicalities of their argument.
Yeah, we'll look at how they're using actual network protocols as legal shields.
Yeah. Which is insane. And we're going to look at what this precedent means for you. Because, look, this isn't just about professional authors protecting their royalties, right?
Yeah.
This touches on the entire future of human creativity and the massive non-consensual harvesting of your personal privacy.
Absolutely. And to map out this landscape, we have a really dense stack of sources today. We're looking at recent rulings from the Northern District of California, specifically that Cadre v. Meta decision, and we're going to contrast it directly with the Bartz v. Anthropic case.
Right, which happened right around the same time.
Exactly. We also have detailed legal memos from firms analyzing these decisions, industry reporting on the internal corporate communications that were revealed during discovery, and several cross-disciplinary papers that apply medical ethics to this.
Oh yeah, the zero consent stuff.
Yeah, specifically the concept of zero consent battery as it applies to modern data scraping practices.
And right off the top, we definitely want to thank our sponsors for today's deep dive, www.myprivacy.blog and www.cytomarketplace.com. Because as we get into the mechanics of how these tech giants are acquiring and securing or failing to secure this data, you're going to see exactly why tools for personal privacy and robust enterprise security are just absolutely critical right now.
Definitely.
We'll touch more on what they do as we get deeper into the privacy implications later. But let's just unpack this. The core of today's discussion centers on the Cadre v. Meta lawsuit.
Right.
We're talking about 13 high-profile plaintiffs here. You've got comedians like Sarah Silverman, Pulitzer winners like Junot Diaz and Andrew Sean Greer, and of course Richard Cadre himself.
Right, the lead plaintiff.
Yeah, and they sued Meta because their books ended up in Llama's training data. And the court actually found that Meta acquired at least 666 copies of these specific authors' works.
Yep, 666 proven copies.
But those 666 books, I mean, that's just a tiny fraction of the larger data set, right?
Right. Exactly. Those specific books were just the ones the plaintiffs could definitively prove were ingested. But they were pulled from a much larger, highly controversial data set known in the industry as Books 3.
Looks great, right?
And Books 3 is an 82 terabyte collection of plain text data.
82 terabytes of just text.
Just text. To put that in perspective, that is millions upon millions of books. And Meta didn't acquire Books 3 through any legitimate academic or commercial channel.
No, they didn't.
They downloaded it directly from notorious shadow libraries, specifically Library Genesis or LibGen and Anna's Archive.
Right.
And these are sites that exist purely to bypass paywalls and copyright restrictions. I mean, they are criminal pirate sites, and Meta's engineers intentionally access them to build their foundational models.
What I found just incredibly revealing in the legal filings is the timeline of how Meta ended up at LibGen in the first place. Because a company with Meta's market cap, they don't just start pirating out of financial necessity.
No, of course not.
They could easily afford to license these works. And looking at the internal communications that were unsealed during discovery, it turns out they actually tried to go the legitimate route initially.
They did.
Their head of generative AI was actively discussing a budget of up to $100 million just to license books directly from major publishing houses.
Because they knew that long-form, professionally edited text is the absolute gold standard for LLM training.
Exactly. It provides the structural coherence and the long context logic that you just don't get from scraping random internet forums.
And that $100 million figure is crucial here because it establishes that Meta inherently understood the immense financial value of this data from day one.
Right, they knew it wasn't free.
Exactly. But they quickly ran into the labyrinthine reality of intellectual property law in the publishing sector. You see, when a publisher signs an author, they don't buy the book outright in perpetuity for all possible uses.
Yeah, they just acquire specific rights.
Right. Print rights, maybe audio rights, some foreign distribution rights. But the subsidiary rights, particularly digital rights related to things like machine learning or data mining, those almost always remain with the individual author or their estate.
So Meta couldn't just write a $100 million check to Penguin Random House and call it a day.
No. The publishers literally did not have the legal authority to grant Meta the license to train AI on those books.
Wow. So if Meta wanted to do this legally, they would have had to build out an entire rights clearance department. They'd have to track down millions of individual authors, literary agents, estates.
To negotiate individual licensing fees.
Yeah, and draft millions of bespoke contracts. And in the context of the current AI arms race, pausing for 5 to 10 years to clear millions of individual rights, I mean, that's essentially corporate suicide.
And that is exactly how it was framed internally at Meta. The unsealed documents show executives concluding that negotiating these licenses was, quote, logistically impossible and infeasible.
Infeasible.
The corporate imperative for speed to market just completely overrode any compliance concerns. But what is truly fascinating is the internal friction this caused.
Yeah, the engineers.
Right. The engineers and researchers actually building Llama, they were not ignorant of what they were doing. The Slack logs and internal emails explicitly show employees discussing the ethical and legal doubts of, quote, pirating the works.
They were highly uncomfortable with the origin of the book's 3 dataset.
Extremely uncomfortable.
And the sources detail how that discomfort actually manifested in real-time corporate CYA behavior.
Suffer your assets, yeah.
Exactly. You have employees actively trying to sanitize their internal language. They started deploying scripts or sending memos, urging their teams to scrub words like stolen or pirated or shadow library from their internal communications.
They framed it as a legal mitigation effort.
Right. It's that classic corporate panic where they realize the discovery process in a future lawsuit is going to expose their exact state of mind. And yet, despite all the internal pushback from the rank-and-file engineers, the decision to proceed with the pirated data was allegedly escalated to the very top. CEO Mark Zuckerberg allegedly made the final call to just use LibGen anyway.
It perfectly illustrates the dichotomy of modern copyright enforcement.
How so?
Well, we operate in a system where if an individual, say a college student, downloads a single textbook via a torrent, they get a cease and desist letter from their ISP.
Oh, yeah. Instantly.
And they potentially face thousands of dollars in fines. It's treated as a strict liability offense. But when an enterprise-scale tech company decides to ingest the equivalent of the entire Library of Congress from illegal sources knowing full well it's illegal and explicitly discussing that illegality internally.
It's suddenly rebranded in federal court as a tactical business choice.
Exactly. It forces us to ask if copyright law only applies to those who can't afford a billion-dollar legal defense.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of that legal defense. Because Meta isn't just relying on their size, they're exploiting the fundamental architecture of the network protocols they use to acquire the data.
This is where it gets really technical.
Right. The sources detail how Meta acquired that 82-terabyte Books 3 dataset using BitTorrent. And this is where the legal arguments become incredibly hyper-technical. Because of the way U.S. copyright law is structured, specifically 17 U.S.C. Section 106, the method of transmission actually changes the liability.
Right. Under Section 106, a copyright holder has several distinct exclusive rights. But the two that matter most here are the right to reproduce the work and the right to distribute the work.
Okay, let's break those down for the listener.
Sure. In a digital context, reproduction basically means downloading it or making a copy in your RAM or on your hard drive.
Just having it.
Just making a copy, yes. Distribution, on the other hand, means uploading it or transmitting it to the public.
Okay.
These are not bundled together. They are legally distinct violations with completely different thresholds for statutory damages.
And distribution is typically penalized far more severely.
Far more severely because you are actively facilitating widespread infringement by others.
And this is where Meta deployed what analysts are calling the leech's gambit, because BitTorrent is a decentralized peer-to-peer protocol. The default behavior of a standard BitTorrent client is to download fragments of a file from various peers while simultaneously uploading the fragments you already possess to other peers who need them.
It's a cooperative network by design.
Exactly. You seed while you leech. That's the terminology. But Meta's lawyers walked into federal court and argued that their engineers specifically wrote custom scripts to modify their BitTorrent clients. They hard-coded them to disable all seeding functionalities.
They basically argued we were absolute parasites.
Yes. We took 82 terabytes of pirated material from the network, but we completely walled off our outbound ports. We didn't give a single byte back to the pirate community.
It is an incredibly cynical yet potentially brilliant legal maneuver.
It really is.
By mathematically proving they disabled the upload stream, Meta argues they cannot be held liable for the unauthorized distribution of the copyrighted works.
They admit to reproducing the works, which they address later in their fair use defense.
But they are desperately trying to sever that distribution claim. Because if you multiply 666 proven books, let alone millions of books, by the maximum statutory damages for willful distribution, which is $150,000 per work.
The financial exposure becomes catastrophic, even for Meta.
Exactly. They're using their lack of digital etiquette among software pirates as a federal legal shield.
But the plaintiffs aren't just rolling over on this. The author's legal team is attacking the technical reality of that claim. They're arguing that based on the foundational architecture of the BitTorrent protocol and how TCP/IP packet transmission actually works, you cannot easily achieve a 100% zero upload state without severely crippling the download speed.
Right, because standard BitTorrent clients rely on mid-download leeching.
Yeah. To keep the connection alive and verify the cryptographic hash of the fragments, standard protocol behavior dictates that some minimal data exchange has to occur. The authors are pushing really hard in discovery to prove that despite Meta's custom scripts, the sheer volume of an 82 terabyte transfer inevitably resulted in Meta distributing some fragments of those copyrighted books back into the network.
And if the plaintiffs can find packet logs or server data proving that even a marginal amount of uploading occurred, Meta's entire leech's gambit completely collapses.
And that massive distribution liability is right back on the table.
It just highlights how deeply intertwined software engineering and legal liability have become. The default toggle of a network protocol can literally dictate the outcome of a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit.
And frankly, the way data moves across networks, and whether your systems are configured to unintentionally distribute or expose sensitive assets, that is a massive vulnerability for any organization, not just Meta trying to dodge copyright claims. Which is exactly why enterprise architecture needs to be locked down. And this is a perfect time to mention www.CISOmarketplace.com. They specialize in connecting enterprises with the precise security solutions needed to audit and protect data flows, ensuring your infrastructure isn't doing something you aren't legally prepared to defend.
Because as Meta is finding out right now, the technical logs of how data enters and exits your servers will be scrutinized down to the packet level in a court of law.
Exactly. Head over to www.CISOmarketplace.com to make sure you're protected. But let's get back to the case. The network acquisition is only the preliminary battle here.
Right.
Even if Meta successfully proves they were only leeching and not distributing, they still have to justify the reproduction, the actual taking and storing of the books.
Which brings us to the absolute core of modern AI litigation, the fair use doctrine,
Yes.
and specifically the concept of transformative use.
Let's dive deep into this because this is fascinating. Fair use in the U.S. is evaluated on a 4-factor test. Meta leaned its entire defense on the first factor, the purpose and character of the use. Right.
Their argument is that ingesting these books to train the Llama AI is a highly transformative process. And Judge Vince Chabria, looking at this first factor, largely sided with Meta.
He did. He adopted a highly technical view of what an LLM actually does. He effectively ruled that an AI model does not read a book.
Right, not in the human sense.
Exactly. When a human reads a novel, we're engaging with the author's expression, the narrative, the emotional resonance. But the judge ruled that an LLM ingests a book solely to extract statistical patterns, syntax, grammar, and the mathematical probability distributions of token sequences.
Which echoes the precedent set in Authors Guild v. Google, right? The famous Google Books case.
It does. In that case, the court ruled that scanning entire libraries to create a searchable database and display tiny snippets was transformative because the end use was fundamentally different from the original books.
Okay, so applying that here. Here, Judge Chabria concluded that because the ultimate technical purpose is to build a text prediction engine, a tool capable of translating languages, writing code, or synthesizing information, that purpose is completely distinct from the original author's intent of entertaining a reader with a narrative story.
So the machine isn't reading. It's mathematically shredding the text into weight adjustments.
Exactly. And therefore, the copying is deemed highly transformative.
What I find so hypocritical about this whole thing is how AI companies market themselves versus how they defend themselves in court.
Oh, the duality is incredible.
Right. In the press, OpenAI, Meta, and Anthropic, they constantly anthropomorphize their models. They use the human student analogy relentlessly. They argue, hey, if a human student can go to the public library, read the entire bibliography of Ernest Hemingway, internalize his style, and then write an original story that sounds exactly like Hemingway, why can't our AI do the exact same thing? It's just learning.
But when you bring that argument into a federal courtroom,
right, suddenly it becomes about statistical token distributions and computational vector spaces.
and Judge Chabria actually called them out on that specific hypocrisy.
He did.
Yeah. While he ultimately ruled in Meta's favor on the transformative nature of the technical process, he absolutely shredded the human student analogy in his written opinion.
Good.
He called it legal gymnastics and deemed the comparison inapt and ridiculous.
Wow. Ridiculous.
Yes. He correctly identified that teaching a human child to write is a fundamentally different process with completely different economic and societal impacts than building a commercial, industrial-scale machine capable of ingesting millions of works in seconds and generating infinite competing content at a marginal cost of zero.
So he rejected the philosophical argument, but upheld the technical one.
Exactly.
But Judge Chabria's interpretation is not the only judicial philosophy currently in play. And this is where the plot thickens. The sources highlight a massive contrasting case that dropped literally 2 days before the Meta ruling in the exact same federal district.
The Bartz v. Anthropic case.
Yes. Anthropic, the makers of the Claude AI, were sued by authors for using the exact same pirated Books 3 dataset. But Judge William Alsup, presiding over that case, took a radically different approach to the concept of fair use and data hoarding.
He really did. Judge Alsup drew a very sharp line between the act of training the model and the act of possessing the data.
Okay, explain that distinction.
He acknowledged that the ephemeral mathematical process of adjusting weights during training might lean toward fair use. However, he ruled that the prerequisite step building, maintaining, and permanently storing a massive, unauthorized digital library of pirated works on corporate servers, that is an independent act of infringement.
He didn't care what they were going to do with it eventually.
Exactly. He called the hoarding of the Books 3 dataset inherently, irredeemably infringing, regardless of what the data is eventually used for.
That is a staggering divergence in judicial logic within the same district. Judge also basically said, look, I don't care if you're using the stolen books to cure cancer or build an LLM. You cannot operate a private pirated shadow library on your enterprise servers.
And that ruling clearly terrified Anthropic.
Okay.
Instead of risking a jury trial with that precedent hanging over them, Anthropic agreed to a landmark $1.5 billion settlement.
$1.5 billion.
Yes, and when you do the math on the number of works involved, it breaks down to roughly $3,000 per pirated book paid out to the rights holders.
Which forces the obvious question. If Anthropic had to pay $1.5 billion for hoarding Books 3, how did Meta avoid that exact same fate just 48 hours later with Judge Chabria?
It all comes down to a highly strategic legal framing known as the integrated inquiry.
The integrated inquiry, yes.
Meta's legal team successfully convinced Judge Chabria that you cannot conceptually or legally separate the downloading of the pirated libraries from the training of the AI model.
They tied them together.
They argued it is one continuous integrated act. Since the ultimate output, the Llama model, is highly transformative and thus protected by fair use, the preliminary steps required to build it, even if they involve downloading pirated material, must also be shielded by fair use.
So the highly transformative end legally justified the piratical means.
That's essentially what the court accepted, yes.
It creates a massive loophole. If you steal a book to read it, you're a criminal.
Oh.
If you steal a book, read it, and then build a multi-billion-dollar commercial algorithm based on the statistical patterns you extracted from it, you're a protected innovator.
It is a bitter pill for the creative industry to swallow.
I can imagine. And it leads us directly into the fourth factor of the fair use doctrine.
The effect on the market.
Right. This is typically the deciding factor in copyright disputes, and it's where the author's case against Meta ultimately collapsed. Let's dig into this.
Well, the fourth factor examines whether the unauthorized use financially harms the potential market for or the value of the original copyrighted work.
And Judge Chabrier ruled that the plaintiffs completely failed to provide empirical evidence that Meta's llama model economically damaged the market for their specific books.
Right. The legal analysts in our sources actually refer to the author's initial arguments here as the clear losers.
Let's break down those losing arguments. First, the authors argued the regurgitation theory. They claimed that llama could act as a direct, free substitute for their books because a user could simply prompt the AI to spit out the text of Junot Díaz's novel, for example.
The judge threw that out quickly.
Why did he throw it out?
Because Meta came to court with empirical proof of their technical mitigations. They demonstrated that they engineered robust post-training guardrails into the llama architecture.
Okay, so they locked it down.
They did. They proved that even using complex adversarial prompting, where researchers actively try to jailbreak the model to force it to output copyrighted text, the system architecture forcefully truncates the output.
It cuts it off.
Exactly. The model physically will not generate more than 50 tokens, which is roughly a paragraph of text, from any recognized copyrighted source.
And a 50-word excerpt is obviously not a viable market substitute for purchasing and reading a 300-page novel.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So the regurgitation argument failed.
Okay, what about the licensing argument? The authors argued, hey, Meta should have paid us that $100 million they originally budgeted. By pirating the books instead, they destroyed a massive potential licensing market, thereby causing us direct financial harm.
The court rejected that argument, too, due to its inherent circularity.
Circularity how?
You cannot claim the loss of a licensing fee as your primary evidence of market harm if the court is currently trying to determine if the use qualifies as fair use in the first place.
Oh, right. Because if it's fair use, no license is needed.
Exactly. If the use is fair use, the law dictates that no license was ever required, meaning no licensing market was technically destroyed. Furthermore, Judge Chabrier pointed out the pragmatic reality. A robust, established collective bargaining market for licensing individual fiction books for AI training does not currently exist.
You can't claim damage to a market that is purely hypothetical.
Exactly. You need real numbers.
But the judge didn't just dismiss the authors and close the book. He wrote a deeply analytical opinion that practically serves as a roadmap for future litigation.
He really gave them a blueprint.
He identified the exact argument the authors should have made, which the sources call the untapped winning argument. He explicitly highlighted the concept of market dilution or indirect substitution.
And this is the existential threat that generative AI poses to human creators. It is not about llama regurgitating Stephen King word for word.
Right.
It's about an LLM internalizing the specific syntactic nuances, pacing, and thematic structures of Stephen King, and then empowering a user to flood the Kindle store with 10,000 brand new, highly competent horror novels written in the exact style of Stephen King.
It's the commoditization of a specific author's voice.
Exactly.
If I'm a consumer browsing for a new sci-fi novel and I have a finite budget of, say, $20 a month for books, and I end up purchasing a cheap AI-generated sci-fi novel that was trained on Richard Cadre's work.
Your money didn't go to Richard Cadre.
Right. That AI output has legally and financially substituted the original in the marketplace. My money went to the user who prompted the machine, and indirectly to Meta, rather than to the human author whose labor trained the machine. The AI is diluting the market share of the very people it learned from.
Precisely. And Judge Chabrier explicitly noted that this kind of market dilution is a highly relevant, deeply damaging market harm under the fourth factor of fair use.
So why did the authors lose?
The tragic irony for the 13 authors in the Cadre case is that they failed to present the specific empirical econometric data required to prove this dilution was already happening to their specific titles.
They didn't have the spreadsheets.
Right. They didn't bring market share analysis or comparative sales data showing AI substitutes cannibalizing their revenue. They lost on an evidentiary shortfall, not a philosophical one.
Wow.
But the judge's ruling is a flare sent up for the entire legal community. He essentially stated, "Bring me the data proving indirect substitution, and the fair use defense will likely fail."
Which makes Meta's victory incredibly precarious. They won the battle on a technicality of evidence, but they basically handed their future opponents the exact blueprint needed to defeat them next time.
They absolutely did.
And as we look at the future of these models, we have to pivot the focus away from professional authors and point it directly at you, the listener.
This is why it gets personal.
Yeah, because this legal precedent doesn't just apply to published books. The exact same arguments justifying the scraping of books 3 are being used to justify the mass ingestion of your personal digital life.
This is the privacy angle, and it is arguably the most expansive and concerning implication of these rulings. The models developed by Meta, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, they are not restricted to public domain literature and pirated novels. Their training sets consist of billions of public posts, intimate Reddit threads, personal comments, product reviews,
And the vast, undocumented troves of data generated by everyday internet users.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your digital footprint is the raw material calibrating the weights of these trillion-dollar systems.
And the sources provide a really striking framework for thinking about this. Privacy advocates and researchers are pulling from medical ethics. They are comparing AI data scraping to unwanted, zero-consent medical treatments.
It's a powerful analogy.
It really is. In the medical field, the doctrine of informed consent is foundational. If a physician performs a procedure on you or uses your biological tissue for research without your explicit, fully informed consent,
Even if they believe the research will cure a disease and serve the greater good.
it is legally and ethically classified as battery. It is a fundamental violation of bodily autonomy.
And the researchers argue that the tech industry has successfully normalized a zero-consent paradigm that would be aggressively prosecuted in any other scientific field.
Right. Tech companies deploy automated crawlers to harvest your personal data, your photographs, your distinct communication patterns, and they use that data to synthesize commercial products that generate billions in revenue.
And they do this entirely without asking for explicit permission or providing a transparent explanation of how your specific data will alter the behavior of their models.
And when these companies claim they do ask for permission, the reality is that they rely entirely on dark patterns.
Dark patterns are everywhere in this space.
I was looking at the recent Terms and Conditions update from Anthropic. They quietly instituted a 5-year data retention policy. That means any interaction you have with their AI, any code you ask it to debug, any personal draft you ask it to edit, can be retained on their servers for half a decade, specifically to train future iterations of Claude.
5 years is an eternity in tech.
It is. And the mechanism they provided for users to opt out was heavily criticized for being intentionally obscure.
Dark patterns are a crucial part of this ecosystem. For those who don't know, they are user interfaces deliberately engineered to manipulate users into making choices that benefit the company, often at the expense of the user's privacy.
Like hiding the unsubscribe button.
Exactly. In the context of AI training, consent is almost universally implicit. You log into a service you rely on daily, and you're confronted with a modal window stating, "We have updated our terms of service," accompanied by a massive, high-contrast accept button.
You just click it to get it out of the way.
Right. The actual option to opt out of data harvesting for AI training is frequently buried in secondary menus, hidden behind hyperlinks in dense legal text, and deliberately obfuscated.
The entire business model relies on the statistical certainty that the vast majority of users will simply click accept to remove the friction and access their account.
Exactly. And the irreversibility of this process is what's truly terrifying.
Yeah, let's talk about the black box.
If you post something on a traditional forum and later regret it, you can delete the post. The database drops the row, it's gone.
Right.
But an LLM is a black box of billions of numerical weights. Once your personal anecdote, your proprietary code snippet, or your unique writing style is ingested and processed during a training run, it becomes permanently encoded into the matrix.
You can't just untrain it.
You cannot point to a specific node in a neural network and say, "Extract my data." The right to be forgotten, which is a core tenet of privacy legislation like the GDPR in Europe, is technologically incompatible with how foundational models are built.
You become a permanent ghost in the machine.
A permanent ghost. And this zero consent extraction model is also generating massive friction at the corporate level. It's not just individuals pushing back.
Right. Look at Reddit.
Consider the ongoing litigation between Reddit and Anthropic. Reddit's entire market valuation is predicated on its archive of authentic, human-generated conversation. It is arguably the most valuable text data set on the internet.
Yeah.
And Reddit has been explicitly clear that they are willing to license this data to AI companies. They just want to be compensated for it.
Which is fair.
But Reddit alleges that rather than negotiating a commercial API license, Anthropic deployed armies of automated bots to circumvent Reddit's rate limits and scrape the site hundreds of thousands of times without paying, directly breaching the terms of service.
It is the ultimate double standard. Tech giants enforce their own terms of service with draconian strictness, but they treat the rest of the internet's infrastructure as an open-source buffet.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
Exactly. They demand respect for their intellectual property while actively disregarding everyone else's. And this is exactly why taking proactive control of your digital footprint is no longer optional. It is an absolute necessity, which is why we highly recommend our sponsor, www.myprivacy.blog.
They're doing great work.
They really are. They provide the in-depth analysis, the tools, and the actionable knowledge you need to audit your online presence. They help you understand exactly how your data is being tracked, and more importantly, how to secure it against being quietly siphoned off into the next generation of LLM training sets. If you want to stop being non-consensual training data, you need to visit www.myprivacy.blog.
Taking control is essential because if we extrapolate the current judicial trend, we are facing a profound paradigm shift.
A massive shift.
If the courts universally adopt the Meta precedent, if they decide that the sheer technical process of AI training is inherently transformative, regardless of whether the source material was pirated from a shadow library via BitTorrent, scraped from a private corporate database, or extracted from users via manipulative dark patterns, we really have to ask, what does copyright even mean in the 21st century?
The legal scholars in the sources refer to this macro implication as the pirate's paradox.
The pirate's paradox, right.
Copyright law, fundamentally, is built on the exclusive right to reproduce a work. But if the courts determine that the only thing that triggers infringement is the final output of the AI, meaning you can only sue if Llama spits out a verbatim copy of your book, then the exclusive right to control the reproduction of your work during the input phase is effectively dead.
It's completely nullified.
The law says you control who makes copies. But Meta has successfully argued that if you make 82 terabytes of copies to feed a statistical machine, it simply doesn't count.
It accelerates the development of a bifurcated justice system where we essentially have piracy for trillion-dollar companies.
As opposed to everyone else.
Right. As we discussed earlier, the individual lacks the resources to defend unauthorized reproduction. But because companies like Meta, Alphabet, and Microsoft operate at an unfathomable scale, they possess the computational and legal power to hoover up the entirety of human cultural output without compensation and then use the sheer transformative magnitude of their processing power as a legal shield.
The scale is the defense.
The paradox is that the very statutory frameworks designed to protect individual creators and foster innovation are being rigidly reinterpreted to allow monopolistic corporations to enclose and monetize the commons of human creativity.
The scale of the theft literally becomes the defense against the theft.
Yeah.
They're arguing, Your Honor, we stole so much data and we processed it through so many GPUs so quickly that it has been mathematically transmuted. It is no longer their property. It is our algorithm.
It is a breathtaking enclosure of public and private knowledge.
It really is.
Okay.
So let's pull all these threads together. This has been a massive journey through the bleeding edge of tech law.
We started with the sheer audacity of Meta's defense in Cadre v. Meta, openly admitting to utilizing the Books 3 dataset from the LibGen Shadow library after abandoning a $100 million licensing effort due to the complexities of subsidiary rights.
Right. We dissected the leech's gambit, examining how Meta manipulated the BitTorrent protocol to disable seeding, attempting to exploit the distinction between reproduction and distribution under Section 106 of the Copyright Act.
We then explored the elastic boundaries of transformative use, looking at how Judge Chabria ruled that extracting statistical token patterns is fundamentally different from reading a novel, validating the integrated inquiry defense, where the transformative AI model justifies the pirated training data.
And we contrasted that directly with Judge Alsop's ruling in the Anthropic case, which penalized the hoarding of pirated data, resulting in a $1.5 billion settlement. We broke down the market harm factors, noting that while authors failed to prove regurgitation or licensing losses, the court validated the theory of market dilution indirect substitution as the blueprint for future lawsuits.
And finally, we broadened the scope to the privacy implications, comparing the tech industry's zero-consent data scraping to medical battery. We looked at how dark patterns and implicit consent are used to permanently encode personal data into black box LLMs.
And how this systemic harvesting is breaking down the fundamental tenets of copyright, creating a reality where scale alone justifies mass appropriation. It is a legal and ethical earthquake, and the aftershocks are going to dictate the architecture of the internet for the next century.
They absolutely will.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought derived from the sources. Right now, these foundational AI models are gorging themselves on the entirety of human history. They are consuming pirated books, copyrighted journalism, Reddit threads, and our personal private communications. They're using authentic human data to generate tomorrow's synthetic content.
But what happens next year?
Exactly. What happens in 5 years when the next generation of massive language models needs to train, but the internet is already overwhelmingly flooded with synthetic AI-generated text? If the foundation of current AI is built on the uncompensated extraction of human labor, what happens when the machine is forced to train on the output of other machines?
Are we building the future of human culture and knowledge on a rapidly diluting recursive foundation of stolen ghost data?
When the AI starts learning exclusively from its own echoes, what happens to the fidelity of human thought?
In computer science, that recursive loop is known as model collapse. As AI trains on AI-generated data, the nuances, the outliers, and the genuine human idiosyncrasies are mathematically smoothed out, leading to a degradation of the model's overall quality.
It's like photocopying a photocopy.
Exactly. It raises a profound question. By refusing to compensate or protect the original human creators today, are these tech giants systematically destroying the very resource they need to sustain their models tomorrow?
It is a terrifying paradox, and it's something to keep you up at night next time you click accept on a terms of service update. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly dense deep dive into the Cadre v. Meta case and the wild frontier of AI copyright and privacy law. We want to give one final massive thank you to our sponsors, www.myprivacy.blog and www.cisomarketplace.com, for making this deep dive possible. Please protect your infrastructure, guard your personal data, keep questioning the digital systems built around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.